Okay, now we are recording, so we can start. So thanks everyone for being here, the panelists and all the people from LexDAO and people from the audience. So thanks for being here. I think this is a very interesting topic. Basically, the main point of this study group is how third country firms, which basically means offshore projects based in offshore countries substantially. There are a lot, like, of course, Panama, BVI, Cayman, Seychelles, there are various. How and under which conditions they can legally sell services, crypto services to countries like the European Union, the US, UK, Australia. These are major countries, are the big markets where, of course, a lot of projects are based in places, in offshore countries where there are crypto-friendly jurisdictions. But of course, the clients, the market is not there. The market is not in the Caribbean. The market is in the US, in Europe, in Australia, in UK, in these kind of places. So all these projects target these markets, but they don't have a license in that market. So this is a major point. In the European Union, we have, and then Marina will more elaborate about this, but in the European Union, we have a rule called reverse solicitation, which comes really from MiFID, which is the piece of law that in the European Union regulates financial instruments before crypto, before MiCA, which is called reverse solicitation, which basically substantially introduces an exemption where third country firms can legally sell services, in this case, crypto services, under Article 61 of MiCA and before under Article 42 of MiFID to people established or situated in the European Union if it's the person, it's the client who solicits. So that is why it's called reverse solicitation. It's at the exclusive initiative of the client. In that case, the firm not based in the EU can sell their services. It's very, the interpretation is very restrictive, but we have this with this rule. But it's interesting also after listening to Marina and to what is really means reverse solicitation Europe, also to understand how other countries they can they treat this kind of situation. Now we have James from the UK, so we'll speak about the United Kingdom. Eric about the US, about the United States. Of course, the United States is the major market in the world. Then we have Victoria, who will speak about Australia, but also about maybe some idea, some information about United Arab Emirates, where she lives. So that's really the order that I would like to follow. So Marina, please, can you elaborate more about the reverse solicitation Europe? What it means, what it implies? I remember we met in Berlin in April, and you were telling me, and a very interesting. It was the Berlin Blockchain Week, and Marina said after that MiCA will come into force. All these projects not based in Europe, just selling gadgets, having booths. We will not see any more things like this. So there will be a clear, a very an infringement of the reverse solicitation principle. So yeah, please, Marina. Marina is the founder. Sorry, Paolo. Marina is the founder of the EUCI, a lobbying group pro crypto in Europe.
Yes, thank you very much for organizing this and of course for the invitation. I can do a short intro. My name is Marina. I'm a lawyer and I'm also a co-founder of the European Crypto Initiative, which is an advocacy group based in Brussels. I've been prior to this study group, so I think that the ones that might listen to the recording might know myself as well and the organization. So I think I would start a little bit with a historical reasoning. What Paolo already mentioned is that we know the rule of reverse solicitation from the financial markets and financial regulation in Europe. And now, in a way, what is very, very interesting is that the financial, at least the directive that is regulating financial instruments, it is a directive versus a regulation right now that we have for the crypto assets, for MiCA. And so in the directive, we have this rule about reverse solicitation, but at the same time, there is, I would say, a lot of room for interpretation for different national competent authorities, like the ones that are basically responsible for following this rule and for observing those rules being followed. And I think that in this case, when we will interpret MiCA in the future and we will interpret these articles regarding reverse solicitation, we might also need to take into consideration different practices and different approaches that national competent authorities had when they were looking into reverse solicitation for financial instruments. That is one thing, and I know that lawyers that are coming from specific member states, they already know in which way this was done in the past as well. Another very interesting historical moment was Brexit. So when Brexit basically happened, all of a sudden, we had certain companies that were incorporated in the UK, but were not anymore a part of the European Union market. And in that case, we have seen some, I would say, quite active engagement from ESMA, for the European Securities Market Authority. They even issued and wrote a letter just making sure that those companies that are incorporated in the UK and had the license in the past and maybe passported this license and had the right to sell those financial products to the European Union market, right now, because of Brexit, that is not the case anymore. And they were even going into some details saying and commenting some of the practices that have been established when when certain, in a way, I would say, terms were written in the terms and conditions. Let's say in the terms and conditions, they were alluding to the fact that the customer was in a way soliciting the activity or the product themselves. So they were basically, ESMA was at the time saying, be careful, no matter what you write in the terms and conditions, those rules still apply, and those cannot be just reversed by adding specific terminology or specific sentences in the terms and conditions. So this just shows that the European Union is taking reverse solicitation rules more and more seriously, to the point where during the negotiations of MiCA, there were some very, very, I would say, serious discussions if the reverse solicitation rule would even be allowed for the crypto assets. And of course, at the end of the day, as we see in MiCA, it is allowed, also because we have this rule within the financial regulation. But it's just to show that the European Union has come through the whole process of finalizing MiCA, finalizing the markets and crypto assets regulation. And then it also wants to make sure that not only, of course, the companies that are based in the European Union are following those rules, but also all the other companies that might be based somewhere else in other jurisdictions. And if they are soliciting the European Union customers, they must apply the same rules. So that's just an introduction. But then going forward, similarly, as Paolo already mentioned, we have the rule of the reverse solicitation in MiCA, and I will just read briefly the Article 61 that outlines the conditions under which the reverse solicitation is recognized within the basically the European crypto assets regulation. In this case, it says in the first article, where a client established or situated in a European in a union initiates and it's at its own exclusive initiative the provision of a crypto asset service or activity by a third country firm, the requirement for authorization under Article 59 shall not apply to the provision of the crypto asset services or activity by the third country from firm to the client, including a relationship specifically relating to the provision of that crypto asset service or activity. So this is basically the rule. Whoever actively seeks an activity that is not offered or regulated in the European Union can do so, and this company that is selling this activity, this basically service or an asset, can in a way offer it to this specific person that is a European Union customer in this case. So there are a few things that might not be very clear going forward. So, for example, the term that you also mentioned, Paolo, what it means, its own exclusive initiative. And there are not that many explanations to this. Going into very much into practice, we have seen that the reference to this has been also made through the ESMA consultation paper that was basically published in according of the Article 61, the same article, but the paragraph 3. And in this case, it's written that the client's own exclusive initiative should be construed narrowly, so a very narrow definition of its own initiative, and the assessment should be a factual one. So looking into how this initiative happened, how the whole activity happened, through a very factual, I would say, assessment. I think that maybe what's also interesting connected to reverse solicitation is some kind of definitions that we also have in MiCA that are linked a little bit more to marketing or prohibition of marketing, advertisement, etc., that we might find also in other directives and rules, and what it means, a term like promotion, solicitation, etc. So I would say that we will look into the past examples when it comes to financial laws and financial regulations, but it is very interesting that, as you know, MiCA has also a specific regulation-specific part that talks about marketing, and that has, I would say, pretty clear rules on how specific, in this case, specific crypto assets can be marketed or communicated about. So those are the very general rules. In practice, as everyone knows, solicitation or basically addressing or marketing means basically addressing the European Union customer in their own language. This is something that a lot of people are aware of, but at the same time, we are also asking ourselves, where is the line? Should there be, let's say, a geo-blocking? Should we go to the ultimate, activity which would basically prevent anyone from accessing or even seeing this website, anyone that is based in the European Union? When it comes to physical activities, can we promote our services in the European Union? Can we sponsor events? Can we speak at specific events, even if it's not directly linked to, I would say, promotion of the product, but it might be just linked to a very specific research developers conference that is not even aimed so much as soliciting, but really exchanging opinions and maybe research. So where should we draw the line? I'm not really sure, and I'm not the one that is going to say right now where the line should be drawn. I think it really depends on the practice of different national competent authorities at the end of the day. But I can say that I have heard in the past that already certain national competent authorities have reached out to some of the event organizers, asking who are the sponsors and asking for a sponsors list, for example. So I'll stop here and I'll give the others the also opportunity to comment.
Thank you. I want just to add one thing, because I'm a EU lawyer, so that's my field somehow. I think that in relation to reverse solicitation, there is a long time case law about MiFID that somehow will be applied to MiCA as well. There are really maybe 20 years of the case law. Of course, there are some differences, but also are the same financial authority, that are competent to apply MiCA, the same that have been applied MiFID for more than 20 years. So are the same authorities. Those authorities created that case law. So I think that will be relevant for MiCA as well. It was just my personal note. So I will now pass to James. So sorry if my pronunciation is not correct. James Burnie, partner at gunnercooke LLP.
So I'm going to speak to the UK side of things.
So the question is how, if in the European Union we had the reverse solicitation, of course, after Brexit, UK is not anymore part of the European Union. We all know that. So how, under UK law, companies not based in the UK can sell, or if there is a possibility of selling crypto services to the UK legally, I mean, without infringing the UK law, which is the framework. How is the situation? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's interesting to see what's going on in Europe, because I think the UK went first on some of this on the crypto side, with a bit of a car crash on the political side, which is always fun to watch. And now you guys get to share in the car crash. I think the first thing is just to kill the thing in the room. Reverse solicitation as a concept does not really exist in the UK. The question then becomes a slightly different one, is in terms of the scope of what we call the general prohibition, which is kind of perimeter as to what is or is not subject to our requirements. So the first thing to note is only crypto assets which are qualifying crypto assets are within that scope of the regime, which means you've got to be both fungible and transferable. So you can sell NFTs into the UK till the end of time, and as long as it's not a security, and the biggest high risk there is an NFT with variable rate of return, you are out of scope. If you are in scope, the FCA, the rules state that if you're capable of having an impact in the United Kingdom, and you have an invitation or inducement targeting the United Kingdom to engage in investment activity, then you are caught. So just unpacking that, if you've got a football club and you simply stick the name of your company down the football club, you are not in scope, because you've not had an invitation or inducement to engage in an investment activity. If, on the other hand, you go to a website and that website starts saying, this is the token, buy our token, and starts pushing people towards it, then you are clearly in scope and you're subject to the prohibition. It then gets a bit entertaining depending on how advanced and your risk profile is. So there are some people trying to argue that a simple buy now button, so simply the ability to buy a crypto asset in and of itself, is not within the scope of the regime. The FCA don't agree. It's grey in the UK because the rules imply you have to have encouragement, but that's not how the regulator sees it. So you can take that approach, but you're going to have a battle with the FCA you may or may not win. See where I'm coming from. The whole thing then effectively looks at then that broader regime, but effectively it's anything which is coming in. So the question then is, if you want to stay outside the regime, where do you end next? So given the FCA views all websites promoting the set of tokens as in scope, the next step is to geo-block the UK. We then go to the dark art thing we all pretend doesn't exist, which is VPNs. Now the VPN is really interesting from a UK perspective, because again, there's what the rules state and there's what the regulator expects. So the rules want that for communication to the UK, and if you geo-block the UK, you can run what I call the lawyer's argument, which you're not approaching the UK. The FCA, on the other hand, is expecting you, in addition to geo-blocking the UK, to have a system whereby every time someone KYCs onto your platform, you then look at their passport and utility bill, and if you're getting UK utility bills, you're saying they're UK persons, so you should block them. So we're seeing two slightly different approaches. Those people who feel they're going to interact with the regulator tend to play very much by the regulator's rule book, and they will simply get rid of anyone with that of a UK utility bill. Those people who are, should we say, slightly more piratical in nature, and therefore want to play slightly more risky, sometimes allowing that through, arguing that they never approached them in the UK. They could have done it, say, when they're on holiday in, I don't know, holiday on the BVI, on a beach, you decide to buy a passport, you decide to buy a crypto asset, you put in a utility bill, doesn't mean you're going to the UK. The last thing in the room then all comes down to percentages. So if 90% of your audience are UK people, you're going to have a really hard time arguing not being approached in the UK market. If you've got 2 million clients and one Brit seems to have gone through, you might get away with it. And that's where, in a way, it's almost a bit of a fail-safe, the whole thing. But there is no such thing as reverse solicitation in the UK as a concept. It doesn't really exist. It's whether you're doing the activity, and that's where the action lies.
Okay, I think you finished. Thank you very much. I will pass to Eric, so because I think it's interesting to listen all the perspective that we can maybe start debating. So Eric is founder of Hess Legal Counsel, and so please give us the same issue, but from the USA perspective, the biggest market in the world, probably. How non-US-based companies can sell to the US, if they can sell legally, what the SEC has to say about that. Yeah, thank you. Unmute, Eric, you have to unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Second time I did this, sorry. So first of all, the SEC doesn't really officially recognize reverse solicitation as an exemption from registration under US securities laws. So foreign crypto companies can't rely on investors' independent contact to avoid regulatory scrutiny. That means that even if a US investor initiates a relationship, the foreign company must carefully avoid actions that could be seen as marketing or soliciting within the US. Any indication that the company engaged in the interest could lead to compliance issues. So a lot of companies might think that maybe Reg S might cover them for international sales, but it only applies to true offshore transaction and explicitly prohibits directed selling efforts, kind of magical words there, directed selling efforts aimed at US investors. So if a crypto company in Europe is issuing tokens under Reg S, they can only market that offering to non-US persons. Even unintentional efforts to reach US investors, much like James said, it's like a social media ad or an online announcement, could potentially be a violation if it appears that the company is trying to, quote unquote, condition the US market, which is conditioning the market is basically an indirect way of selling into the US. So what does that leave us with? We don't have reverse solicitation. Reg S may not be an option. What's foreign crypto company to do? They can try to rely on an exemption like Reg D or 144A, really Reg D, but those come with their own limitations. Reg D, basically it's an exempt securities offering, so there's that. It allows private placements to accredited investors. 144A permits sales only to large institutional buyers, and these routes bypass broad marketing but narrow the potential US base significantly. So and the problem with all of this obviously is if you have an innocent misstep, it can attract the SEC's attention. I don't even need to tell everybody what happens in the US when you do that. And then another layer to all that, of course, since that wasn't enough, is state blue sky laws in the US. So if you're selling in the US, then you still may have to deal, even if you can do an initial issuance under Reg D, but if there's the secondary market could also have blue sky implications, which is the state laws. And then on top of all that, since it isn't enough, you also have foreign companies might also have compliance issues with like anti-fraud rules, which is Section 10B and Section 10B5 of the Securities Exchange Act. So any deceptive practices, even offshore, can lead to penalties in the U.S. system. So reverse solicitation is really nice to have in foreign countries, but it's not a safe harbor in the U.S. You either have to register or comply with exemption requirements, even if those investors come knocking on the company's door.
Okay, thank you. It looks like until now the EU is the most crypto-friendly jurisdiction, which. So now we have our last panelist, which is Victoria Wells, co-founder of Ape Law, who is from Australia, but also lives part of the year in United Arab Emirates. So the same question that you heard here, if you can tell us what's the situation in Australia, and also if you want to speak about United Arab Emirates, that would be also interesting. So how is the situation of some of a company not based in Australia trying to sell crypto services into Australia?
Hi there. Okay, so Australia is quite an interesting jurisdiction. We don't have a formal reverse solicitation relief framework, and it's been a little bit of a painful process evolving on from what might have existed. So we have a foreign financial services provider framework, which is currently the subject of reform that keeps getting commuted, not once, not twice, but 3 times. So 3 times is perhaps the charm. That framework is expressed in ASIC Regulatory Guide 176, which was published in 2020. And it details when a foreign financial services provider might be eligible to apply for a modified form of a financial services license, and it's known as a foreign AFS. Another important piece of guidance is the consultation paper that came before the regulatory guide. It's paper 315, and it was published in 2019. That consultation and the subsequent framework did away with limited connection relief, which is fundamentally what we all understand as reverse solicitation. Previously, foreign financial service providers with minimal ties to Australia could operate without an Australian financial services license. And the limited connection relief basis was the basis upon which that relief was provided. It's quite self-explanatory. And that's to be found in Section 119D in our Corporations Act. Now, the new framework, which is meant to be for a modified form of a foreign financial services license, so lesser obligations, provided that there is equivocal regulation by an alternative regulator in an equivalent jurisdiction, that is meant to come into play shortly. But as I said, it keeps on getting commuted. So it was commuted once to 2020, and then again to 2022, again to 2023. And now we have a really interesting scenario in Australia where our regulators, ASIC, our primary regulator, has decided to do away with a lot of indecision and concern around crypto businesses and how they're regulated. And now they have come forth with an edict explaining that they expect market operators to obtain an operation license. So a market operator license, which is tiered. There's a tier 1, a tier 2. Tier 2 has a reduced level of regulatory requirements and compliance requirements, but that is due to be ushered in the next 12 to 24 months. So it means that not only is there a cleanup around foreign financial services provider licenses and the framework there, but more broadly for licensing of the entire industry wholesale. And I think that that is a good thing because it delivers some clarity for businesses that want to operate in Australia. And yeah, now over to the EU, or the UAE. You have to forgive me, it's late. So the UAE is really interesting as well. We have a federal regulator in the SCA, and they have put forth some regulation that explicitly endorses and creates a reverse solicitation framework with some requirements around it. But we also have a third layer. So we have federal, we have emirate, and then we have free zones. So we have 2 additional free zones, one in Abu Dhabi and one in Dubai. And they operate as dedicated fiefdoms of regulation, and their jurisdictions out of which financial service providers and products are created and distributed. So you also have reverse solicitation frameworks that are permitted and emanate from there as well. So it's a slightly different environment in the UAE. But I would say now that I've been living and working in the UAE for almost 2 years, I've found the federal and the financial free zones to be extremely open to crypto business, operate in a relatively healthy manner with the industry to put forth consultation papers and regulations that are permissive of our industry and move it forward. And most recently, we've got some yield-producing stablecoin consultation papers that have been produced by Abu Dhabi's financial free zone, and some legislation from the central bank is due quite shortly in relation to dirham-backed stablecoins.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was very interesting. I don't know if there are questions, comments, ideas. Yeah, Ramona, please. Ramona is a LexDAO member, also a member of the operating committee of LexDAO, so which we all have to thank you.
Thank you. Actually, thank you, Paolo, for organizing this and everybody showing up. today and talking about this important topic. I want to sort of point to the elephant in the room. So I'm based in the Cayman Islands right now. The Cayman Islands is like famous offshore center, sort of nexus of, big hub for international offshore funds and international money flows and all that, and wants to maintain its position, obviously. And we're seeing a lot of these projects. And some of the ways where we are seeing the justification of being this sort of like tax neutrality systems is that this is a worldwide project. This is a transnational project. The wealth is being created by the participants all over the world that contribute to this big project. Why should we go to a specific country and comply with a specific set of rules when in reality we should be complying with all the rules? So I want to bring it back in terms of most blockchain projects are transnational in nature. They are meant to be everywhere. How can we help them not get in trouble when they're supposed to comply with this and this and that, and it adds up pretty quickly? If they want to have an international reach, it adds up pretty quickly to 100 or so set of legal frameworks, at least. How on earth can they do that?
Yeah, please, whoever wants to speak, and then we have a question from Lawrence. Yeah, please.
It's an interesting one because I've been involved in the African, so I've been drafting a couple of the African frameworks as well as the Kazakhstani framework, and every single one of the regulators seem to head towards get a local license. And one of the first things the Kazakhstanis did is they kicked out Coinbase. Coinbase went, we're Coinbase, we're important. They went, we're Kazakhstan, we're important. Fuck this, you see what I mean? I don't mean to sort of undermine the importance of Cayman as a jurisdiction, because if this is effectively the roadmap of the hedge funds being reinvented effectively, and actually from a UK perspective is the hedge fund rules being cross-applied. The tax advantages of a place like Cayman still hold out and still make sense, and as a central starting point, yeah. But when you're going to big financial centers, they all want their pint of blood, if you see what I mean. And what's been interesting is some of the regulators we've spoken to on the quiet are saying people are saying to our jurisdiction illegally, and we don't know if we want to do something about it or not. You see where I'm coming from. So I don't think Cayman will disappear, but I think some form of subsidiarization for each jurisdiction is going to happen. And yeah, I think when you say you're global, that is complying with every law in the world. I once had a client do that. They got one hell of a legal bill as a result, if you see what I mean. But that is where it's going, and that's where I'm afraid that's where the only way I see it going. Or you go full Pirates of the Caribbean, which one or two of them are doing. And there's been an interesting thing about FATF, you've seen that, where they said the FATF restrictions may not apply to certain smaller jurisdictions. They don't have the GDP to pay for it. At which point you get a whole different play out there, if you see what I mean. But no lawyer wants to talk about that because that's the fuck it. I just put the rule book in the bin. We pretend it doesn't exist 5 minutes. But that I've got my popcorn out to go watch because unfortunately in the UK we can't get away with that stunt. But I think other countries might get away with it.
Yeah.
And it only seems to last for so long too. I mean, it is a bit of a rotating carousel, right?
Okay, sorry. I have Victoria. Lawrence, I will give the.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Apologies.
Yeah, no problem. I will give the floor to them because I think the Victoria and Marina, they want to speak about the point made by Ramona. So then I will give to you the floor, Lawrence. Okay. So Victoria, please.
Great question, and Eric's points and James' points are very valid, and I reiterate the pint of blood. Every regulator wants to extract their pound of flesh, and we see concessions in that sort of that desire to, create licensing frameworks, create a lot of money that's revenue that's produced through licensing of compliance. We see collaborative efforts, passporting is an option. That's one that I don't have a lot of faith in because it's regulated driven and requires collaboration and cooperation and sharing of the pie, as it will. But from a very practical standpoint, it comes down to lawyers working in a very collaborative, dynamic manner and being cost conscious. The first question I ask a client that is producing something that's interesting and is going to be global in terms of geography, my first question is, what is it? What does your client look like? Are they retail? Are they professional? Are they something else? And what are the key jurisdictions in which you intend to participate in? Have you done your split testing? Have you done your market testing? Have you identified where your consumers are, your core consumers? You don't start with, everybody all around the world. You have to be quite targeted and commercially minded. And once you've been able to drill down into where your core consumers are going to come from, then you can start working on a geographical approach to where your clients are coming from and how do you get your assets into those markets in a legal way.
Yeah. Marina, please.
Thank you. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this is going to work out right now when MiCA is going to be applicable next year. So I think especially the example of stablecoins is very interesting. It's like the part which covers stablecoins is already applicable, as you all know, but certain stablecoins that are not registered are still listed on European Union exchanges that are serving European Union customers. So I can still buy those stablecoins if and when I'm based in Europe. So that might change with January. And this is where we see basically projects that have existed for years, even 7, 6 years or 5 or even more, jurisdictions acknowledging that this is such an important matter that they want to regulate it in such a very specific and I would say pretty stringent way, especially when it comes to stablecoins, that right now this global project does not exist anymore as a global project, but it is very, very important who is holding this asset, when and how it is bought, and by what is it backed, and where are the reserves, etc. So I think that this is very interesting, especially because we do not have a global stablecoin regulation. And also because, of course, there's efforts in different jurisdictions, but also like you mentioned before, FATF, I will mention here IOSCO and other international organizations are really pushing for a global stablecoin regulation. So whenever you are going to have a product that was global and that existed for such a long time, unfortunately or fortunately, the regulator decided this is an important matter and you will need to have a specific product in every jurisdiction. I think, at least from what we have seen from MiCA, those products had to be changed in order to be compliant with what MiCA has as rules when it comes to stablecoins.
Okay, thank you. So now I think Lawrence has a question, which was different one. So thank you for your patience, please.
Yeah, my question is that at the moment, it seems to me that people are sort of looking at on a product to product basis. But what about equivalence in that? Do we have any hope of a regime which allows certain classes of products, and that different jurisdictions agree that there's a certain acceptable standard of disclosure, probity, etc., and then such a regulatory regime would be equivalent and therefore can be accepted as, not requiring more than just some nominal registration. And I'm thinking of free trade zones like Australia and New Zealand, or the upcoming Trans-Pacific Partnership. I mean, can we have an equivalence regime which works on product classes rather than individual company by company?
I think there are a lot of hands that have been raised. So in order, Victoria, please.
Great question, Lawrence. You're presupposing that we can get regulators to agree on what product categories and categorizations are, and we're not there yet. So I'm hopeful, but I'm a skeptic.
Marina?
So please apologize, but I will go back to IOSCO, and maybe it's a little bit kind of a divergence from what you asked. But when we see the crypto assets report coming from IOSCO, there was no definition of a crypto assets there. And, when we were kind of discussing why is this so, it's politically so challenging that even an international organization could not agree on something as basic as a definition. So we are basically doing now a project where we are selected few jurisdictions, and we're just going to map how crypto assets are defined in those specific jurisdictions by laws or by just guidance or any type of documents that those jurisdictions have, and you'll see that there's a huge difference. So I'm not very optimistic. I again think that they're very, very, I would say, willing to work on their own terms and their own ways of how to define certain assets that seem to be quite important.
Ramona?
Oh, thank you. You're putting me on the spot. I wasn't planning to mentioning anything, but if I were to mention something, I think that
you raised your hand. I mean, I'm following.
No, it was previously. It was previously.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Okay,
I
I'm
like.
sorry. No, okay,
No,
I'm
no,
sorry.
no.
Okay.
The universe is calling on me now. It's
Okay,
all. It's all good. It's like the FATF did succeed on pushing this in terms of at least the definition and the framework for virtual assets generally, which some of the countries have adopted, more or less in the proposed form. And I think it is possible, and this shows the importance of what we're doing in LexDAO and what we can do as lawyers from various jurisdictions joining forces, because we can map these things out and sort of try to make it easier for projects to navigate, but also working on harmonizing these structures, because sometimes it's just language. Sometimes it's just like the cultural sort of history of the thing. But if we can't manage it with this new industry that is transnational from the beginning, that's completely new, then we really have no hope of managing with anything else in the new digital economy. And that's really becomes a problem right now. So yeah, just wanted to thank you.
Okay, so James, please, sorry, you were after Marina, so sorry. So please.
I'm more optimistic. I think the first question is the lawyers like to see a passport. We're obsessed with passports. We think auto equivalence. Don't think we're necessarily going to get that. But what we are seeing is the FCA and the MAS in Singapore spoke to each other and coordinated before putting in their rules on financial promotions into jurisdictions. I'm seeing other regulators get around the table and talk to each other. So I'm aware of African regulators as talking to each other about how best to approach it on a more multinational level. I think you've got to you've got the fact at the moment that bluntly, you've got a group of guys around the table. Even here, you've got a group of guys around the table. All of us get paid bluntly when a client comes to our jurisdiction and wants to come to our jurisdiction. Off the back of that, you're always going to have a certain level of rivalry in the room as to where you should set up, where you should sell to, and different countries have got different strengths off the back of that. So a full, entirely global, it's a small world style approach, but an approach where regulators hunt as packs, that's what I'm seeing more and more. And therefore, when you say equivalence, depends what you mean by equivalence, because I have an easier ride taking certain countries through the FCA as a starting point than other countries coming to the FCA as a starting point, because they understand each other. So I am optimistic, but then I'm optimistic from a bloke who's been worn down over the many years to have lower expectations, if you see what I mean. I think it depends if you're coming with high expectations or low expectations, but I think a certain level of mutual understanding is going to come in, and I think and socialists have always hunted as packs. UAE and the UK have traditionally hunted as a pack. Same with Singapore, Hong Kong, there's a grouping there. Europe tends to hunt as a pack, if you see what I mean. The question in my mind then for the future is going to be, when you set yourself up, which of the packs are you going to go for first? Not saying you're not going to do all of them, but which is going to be your initial pack, which is going to be your secondary pack, how cohesive are the packs? These are the interesting points. And I think part of where I'm coming from is because being British, we've come out of the EU, we've left one pack, and we're now trying to either set up or join other packs, if you see what I mean, which is why I think we're kind of peculiarly sensitive to this kind of a question, if you see what I mean, because effectively the UK is now taking a slightly different approach to some of this. So it's getting closer with places like Singapore, where it has historic size, and less close in some ways to the EU, which is now seen more as a rival territory in some ways, rather than as part of the same pack. Although I have a feeling other people will shoot me for expressing that opinion, you see where I'm coming from. But I think that the pack is going to be an interesting thing as it plays out.
Okay, now Eric, so last but not least, please.
All right, so I'll find a way to work pack into my response as well. Since, but I agree with what James says. I think the there will be convergence on common standards. I think that's inevitable. I think crypto sort of drives those common standards, but common standards does not mean unified filing requirements, right? So, like in the US, we have 20F, for example. You're a foreign listed issuer, you want to go into US, you file a 20F. And there's certain acknowledgments within the SEC that, there's certain exchanges where if you're listed on that exchanges, it's a simpler process to get listed or cross-listed in the US, but you still have to file your own separate form. So common standards, yes. I think those who abide by certain common standards are, within the packs are going to, are going to have an easier time, but they're still going to have to file a pack of disclosures. So there you go. I used pack 4 times, I think 5. I don't know. Tried.
Okay. Other questions, comments? I don't know. No question, no comments. Luis, please. Luis?
Hello. Well, in Latin America, it's different. For example, in El Salvador, Bitcoin is used as a legal tender. So for example, in Colombia, there's like a kind of sandbox in which you can do most of the things that you're planning, but specifically in that jurisdiction and in Colombia also, and also Brazil has more stronger regulation. But I think that in Latin America would be really useful to have as I don't know if I can say that we would ever gonna have something like MiCA in European Union, but something that can facilitate the trade in here of crypto assets. And in Mexico also, it's kind of a sandbox in which you can explore, or you can explore the different technologies there are. So it's been a pleasure to hear from all of you. Thank you for this opportunity, and to hear how things are going in different jurisdictions. So this is very useful for me to have some perspective about it. So thank you.
Ramona? Sorry,
I'll let Victoria answer first, and
yeah,
then
sorry,
I'll come back.
Victoria. So I'm sorry.
After you, Ramona, please.
No, maybe I can loop in another question and sort of as with this, because I think that Luis made a very good point. We do have existing transnational channels and networks right now. And yes, they do operate within national boundaries, but the global discussion is based, like, I would like to hear about posting on Twitter or on whatever other media people are using that's global, in terms of, would this qualify as solicitation or direct or reverse solicitations? Like, am I still allowed to speak up as an individual in a certain country right now, or would anyone consider it's going to be direct solicitation?
Victoria, if that is fine, I will give the floor to Eric and then to you, because I think Eric it's a reply to Ramona. Okay.
Okay. I wanted to reply to Luis, and
okay,
I think
sorry, please. Okay.
Sandboxes are a really important element for lawyers and for practitioners in crypto to keep an eye on, because they're invariably these testing grounds where regulators look at a particular product, a particular service. They have existing frameworks for licensing of regulated financial services and regulated virtual asset service providers. They are looking at the asset classes that are coming to market. And here in the UAE in particular, and I've had experience in Australia with the sandboxes there, but here in the UAE, the sandboxing activity that you do with the regulator is incredibly involved. You sit down with the regulator and you bring a product or a service to market, and that activity is handheld over a period of time. There are bounds put on what you're doing and how you're operating, and they might be in terms of the number of clients that you're servicing. It might be in terms of the value or the economic size of the project. But I think they're super valuable because it allows regulators and industry practitioners to work together to identify how they're going to just characterize something or bring it to market, or some other key and crucial activity. And oftentimes how a product interacts not merely in the domestic market, but how it interacts globally is part of that conversation. So I think it's incredibly important for the people that are on this call that are interested in reverse solicitation and are interested in how, you bring forth products and service in a global capacity. It's to really look at what regulators are interested in, what they're regulating, what they're bringing forth consultation papers about, and what they're sandboxing.
Eric and after James. Eric, please.
Yeah. So is Twitter a safe harbor? I think the answer is no. It's easier with some foreign languages like French. Like I had a client who was posting stuff in French, and the French weren't all that happy about it, so we had to take it down. But English, it's like, well, I could be trying to sell it to James. I might not be selling to Marina, or it's English is the international language. But having said all that, if you look at like the Wahi case, the SEC versus Wahi, it didn't take much. The fact that you sought some sort of secondary listing in the market somewhere, and that you made some sort of statement that was public that indicated that there was some potential for benefit, forget even profit expectation, which is a whole different matter, but it didn't take much. The public statement combined with an additional activity, and YouTube, Twitter, it just doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think it's really coupled with what other actions you're doing. Like if you just broadcast something on Twitter, you can't necessarily say that you're targeting US, but it doesn't help, if ultimately US people are buying your tokens in initial distribution.
Okay, James, and after Marina. James, please.
This is where the UK and the US can then take pot shots at each other as to who wants to regulate which tweet first, if you see what I mean. Because the FCA also believes every single tweet and the entirety of the English language is the dominion of the UK regulator. In the UK, I'd be interested to see if you think this approach works in the US as well. In the UK, the standard approach to get out of this is just to write not for UK, or if you want to get fancy, only related to, and you can list all the exemptions we have in the UK effectively and sort of park it there. And then if the follow through matches that, so when you say not for UK, that isn't then buy here from the UK being your next statement, I mean the follow through has to come in, then you can argue your way out of targeting the UK market, but the onus is really on you to explain why, that you're not approaching the UK, not for the FCA to argue you are impacting the UK. So the bodge has been the disclaimer followed by a follow through, if you see where I'm coming from, like you actually have to block us.
So James, I have a question for you. Just out of your clients, how many of them put that in their Twitter posts?
We're actually having our clients now do the marketing. So we brought a marketing team within the firm, and they're helping people go through it, and they're putting on all their Twitter posts effectively. So that's becoming really quite common. It's becoming a standard thing. The reason it's become so popular is the FCA have got a new hobby. The new hobby is to send letters to people threatening them with a 2-year jail sentence if they don't pull their act together and stop approaching the UK. The interesting bit there isn't so much the threat of the 2-year jail sentence, although that does cause people to blink. The interesting bit is because it's a criminal offence in the UK, what the FCA can then do if you don't respond is they put out something called a consumer warning, which is a public statement by the FCA saying these guys are doing a criminal offence. When they do that, every single bank and service provider is now handling the proceeds of crime. All of your banks then freeze all your assets, and the SEC doesn't have to do jack shit to come after you in real terms because you have no company anymore. And they're using that to stop the company. Company has to come to the FCA. FCA can take as long as it likes. That's the approach that's going to get taken in. And because we've got people, we've just defended success with the first guy where the FCA has put in the threat. We managed to sort them out of it. I'm expecting someone to get crispied by this at some point. And we're getting ahead of it now by putting in disclaimers and all the rest of it. But because it's like a tiny number of words, everyone is sticking it in. The question you didn't ask me, and I'm glad you didn't ask me, is the question of, are they actually then stopping UK guys getting, if you see what I mean? They say not, they put up the geo block, everyone down to loads of VPN. What happens next? That goes into the big box of questions of, do you really want to ask me? Because I know what people are doing. I know what the FCA want. They're two distinct things, and the FCA hasn't done anything about it yet.
Marina?
So those are some very interesting questions. I would maybe start with an example that happened in Europe, where someone tweeted GM Germany, and that was in English, but it was GM Germany. So that was already something that was interesting to look into when it comes to Twitter, for sure. Another very interesting thing that has, I think, a lot of people thinking about what will happen in the next few months is because we don't really know what is outside of the scope of MiCA and what's inside of the scope of MiCA, especially when we have this like kind of not very clear services, etc., that might be decentralized. For example, they're not really centralized exchanges that are already having licenses and working on it for months. What should we do in this case? Because again, we don't know exactly who's regulated, who's not regulated, who's within the scope, who's outside of the scope. And when it comes to communication, when it comes to, again, events, when it comes to any sort of, I would say, again, communication about this project service or token, what should we do in this case?
Okay, thank you. Other comments, questions, points?
I mean, I really have
a
to ask
question.
If we're creating a friendly business environment, but that's it. It's like, are we actually wanting these people to work together across borders to create the new world, or not really?
I think the question there is, we want to be a crypto hub in the UK, but we're going to use a baseball bat rather than a carrot. Everyone says they want to be a crypto hub, but the reality situation is, if you force people to come in if they want to access your jurisdiction, you're becoming a crypto hub. You're just not doing it in a nice way. And that's where some of the jurisdictions are going. And that's where there's been this fantastic miscommunication where both sides are coming away as thinking crypto hub, but two very different expectations in mind. And that's going to be quite fun to watch in action. Fun I'm seeing here is the bastard lawyer on the sideline with the popcorn watching the carnage happen, if you see what I mean. But yeah, I think the question is crypto hub does not necessarily mean, in my mind, crypto friendly. It just means a hub for the business.
And I can agree with you, James, because we have people coming and, asking, should we geo-block Europe the same way as we're doing with UK? So it seems that it's just the next step into, what they have already seen in UK.
I have a different experience from working in Australia, which has been notoriously Me Too, following the SEC in its policy directives. And
my condolences.
Coming from that jurisdiction, and now living and working in the UAE, which established the first free zone, established its digital asset framework in 2018. And now there are three competing ones, which is pretty incredible. And given that there's that jurisdictional competition within the UAE itself, you actually see regulators that are not only permissive, but really want to work with industry to create these environments in which virtual asset service providers can operate and tokens can issue from. Add to that there is a fourth jurisdiction that will heat up the competition, as Saudi is due to introduce a financial free zone of its own early next year. So it's really chalk and cheese looking at how these different jurisdictions and different regulators seek to attract crypto business, and do so in a cautious way, but definitely do so.
Thank you. I don't know if there are other questions. Marina, maybe?
Yeah, I had a general question to everyone in the audience. It's more of a, how much do you think reverse solicitation is a strategy for projects? Because I've seen that at the beginning, maybe a few months ago, some years ago, they were pretty optimistic. They're like, oh, reverse solicitation is possible. You know, we're not going to register in Europe. We're not going to ask for a license. There are already users that are coming to us for years, and this is still going to continue even if we don't have, or if we don't do any type of solicitation or marketing. And I think that this is a very interesting use case as well, because the services in a way are pretty new. And there were also not that many out there. And maybe there are not that many in the European Union. So it is true that without doing any type of solicitation or any type of marketing, this specific company has a lot of users that are coming from the European Union, and they might just continue being users, or they might gain new users just by basically word of mouth. So yeah, just a short comment if anyone wants to share.
Yeah, anyone want to answer? Even from the audience, of course.
It's going to remain a mystery.
Yeah. Well, my observation from the developer side is that I think it comes down to definition of solicitation. And if it says a sale of financial product, that's very clearly defined. You know, you're asking someone to buy a product, which is maybe a bit too vague. But on the other hand, if you say the invitation to treat, which is a pre-contract, we say, come here, we'll talk about it, we'll give you the details, and we'll bargain about it. That tends to be closer to the development side rather than the sale of a product side. So in the spectrum of activities, I think we need to be careful to say, is it R&D level, or is it actual kind of sell something to the consumer level? So it depends on where you sit on the spectrum.
Okay, any other points?
I think from my end, this is all pay to play, if you see what I mean. I think the question at the moment is that when we're talking about reverse solicitation, I think the other thing in the room is how costly is it to access each market is going to become the big question in the room. And it's interesting at the moment because we're approaching the EU, and I don't care which EU country we go through. We've discovered that certain countries are much cheaper to route through than others. Effectively, it's surprising sometimes what you get in terms of what costs what. The UK is not particularly cheap. I'm completely blunt about it. I'm trying to get the cost down, if you see where I'm coming from. But I know I'm not particularly cheap, and I know I shoot myself in the foot when I go down the rabbit hole. But I think, you know, the other quality to all of this is how much does it cost to get into it, you know, the boring old-fashioned compliant way, if you see what's being, rather than the fun parts the Caribbean way. And I think that that's going to be quite a focus in the next few years. And I think that's really to be determined. And to me, that's now going to become the battleground rather than trying not to do it, you know, but trying to use reverse solicitation.
Marina? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so in a way, it's linked to what Victoria has mentioned, even in the previous remarks. We need to understand from the beginning, let's say there is a new project right now, fundraising. So again, to anyone that might be listening, you need to know which markets are you going to access. And this needs to be a plan in a fundraising process. You need to know, of course, the costs, but also how big, how global this project should be. And that needs to be taken into consideration. Of course, is this if this is the plan, and if whatever activity they're doing, it's regulated or will be regulated in the future. And I think that that's also already seen there. Like, I don't know, we're talking to some investors. They said for, I think, almost a year or even more, we're not anymore investing in stablecoins, because we know now the burden that it is for being compliant, at least in Europe, when it comes to stablecoins. So it is shifting. Is it changing also the strategies, beginning from the investors, projects, builders, etc. At least in Europe, I'm observing that here.
Well, it's easy in the U.S. because we do a pretty good job of chasing projects away. So we're like the anti-hub right now. That might change.
Fingers crossed.
other points? Questions? Maybe we can close this call, I think. Someone wants to say some final remark about Marina, maybe?
Just the last one, again, going back to what James said, you can access Europe through different jurisdictions, and they might not be identical when it comes to costs, but also the manpower of the NCA, the experience they had in the past, and passporting is a very, very good feature of MiCA. So that might be, I think, an interesting thing looking into the strategy of being a part of European Union market.
So I think we can close here. I would like to thank all our panelists, and this was organized by LexDAO. So thank everyone. I'm going to close. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.